What we should do with our shoulders at the catch, quintessentially, is to help us to suspend. And the goal is to keep them visually speaking stable, to keep them low, and to suspend them a bit and hold them suspended throughout the drive into the finish. So that was the short version of it. Now the longer version and why we do something. Ultimately, during a rowing drive, what we want to use is our body weight. Our body weight is one of the most important factors in rowing, and I think it's very often overlooked. And if we think about body weight, then we try to swing the upper body back, and we try to limit the swing back because we don't want to overdo it. That even shouldn't be a question. How far would you lean back? The question is much more, how do you get your body weight into the equation right at the catch? And for that, the shoulder is primarily responsible. You have to picture your body like that. It's got two weak links. The weak link number one is the low section of your core. So everything around the pelvis. So the pelvis is mostly stabilized through deep muscles, and deep muscles happen to be almost impossible to trigger voluntarily. It's not like the biceps, or say, look at my biceps, and you trigger it and it pops up. The deep muscles yet are quintessentially responsible to transfer all the energy from our feet to our hands. We are simply lacking a bone structure. I've talked about that in different videos. I will quickly repeat it in case you haven't seen it. So we're going from ankles to knees, knees to hip joint. This is pretty much a straight bone connection. On top of that, our quads are usually very strong because they carry our body weight all day. If we go from wrists to elbows to shoulders, this is pretty much a direct bone connection. Not as strong, neither in terms of bones nor in terms of muscles, but certainly strong. But then, what would you actually have between shoulders and hip joint? There's not much. So we've got the chest bone, ends around here. We've got the rib cage, not really good structure. It's more there to protect your lungs and organs a bit. It doesn't stretch down all the way. Then we got the spine, which itself doesn't have any structure in terms of stability. So naturally, we need to use muscles to transfer force from the soles of our feet to our hands. And that per se is not a big deal. However, the rowing motion happens to be one where we are usually, especially at the catch, at least in a straight up position or ideally in a forward facing position. And now at that stage, what you need to do is start your leg drive and hope that that part in the middle, which is quintessentially responsible to transfer all your good intentions, namely energy, here to the hands, holds up. But the question is, how does it do that? And why does it do that? Now we come back to the two weak points we have in our body. The first one is the pelvis. So I think what most people are neglecting is a pelvic stability. So you should be able to do that. But vice versa, you should be able to hold it firm if you want to. So pelvic stability is something you should be able to control, not just standing up, but also seated. So seated pelvic tilt is essential. There are ways around it, and in a separate video, I will talk about what you can do if you have issues with sciatic nerve pain, but that's a different video. Maybe subscribe or hit the notification bell if you're interested in that. The second weak point is another transfer or another turning point of energies. What is a turning point of energies? Ankle, knee, it's a natural turning point of energies, the knee and the ankles. But these joints are designed to do that. Knee to hip joint, excellent. Hip joint is designed to be a rotational turning point of energy. Between our hip joint and the shoulder, they're just muscles designed to avoid twisting and rotation. This is why we have such a high density of muscles in our core. So we have to make sure that between the rotation point of energy, hip joint, and the second one, the shoulders, there is no additional twist. This is that simple. Now, if we don't control the second weak point, the shoulders, what's going to happen? The shoulders will go up because our hands go up. Let me do a couple of strokes and show you what happens if you don't control your weak points at all. This. You just don't transfer energy. Let me try this again. Reminds you probably a bit of best of gym fail videos. And that's exactly what's happening. If people just don't feel what the actual goal is about rowing, we do this. Looks silly, is silly, doesn't have any benefit. Now, the opposite would be to be super stiff and brace all the time. The thing is, nobody can hold this for a long time. The overall objective about rowing is to relax as much as you possibly can. It's exhausting enough anyway. There is no use to waste energy. So how do we go about that? And now comes something that I realized I should rephrase. A new way of putting things to myself and to my athletes that I recently found is that the rowing motion is actually not so much a motion, it's the alternation of stretches, tension and pre-tension in certain muscle groups. When we want to bridge the gap between shoulders and hip joint, we have a choice. Do we use small muscles or big muscles, and what do we use predominantly? We probably cannot exclude any of the muscles realistically, but we can select which muscles are best suited for the job and try to get these into the equation as early as possible. Now, if you want to get a muscle into an equation or into a function early, what would you do? You probably would give it a bit of a stretch, and that's a mistake that I see many rowers do. When you go to the catch, what many people do is they start to move everything at once. Legs, shoulders, and hands. Most rowers' intention is to try to move everything back at once and be rigid. Rigid in the shoulders, rigid in the back, rigid in the front of your torso, rigid in your legs. Everything is rigid. And then people wonder why they have a hard time to connect and feel the water. If you're too rigid here, the problem is that you just don't feel what's going on. Realistically, in the boat, you have to imagine that you have your outboard and the blades. Forgive us, there's not enough space on the work floor, so I didn't mount full oars on that bi rower. Nor did I do this video in the boat simply because I can explain things better on a bi rower. This is how I coach, it's just much easier. And you have to imagine that there was a blade, and the blade, the moment I put it in, what I'm looking for is a horizontal connection. I'm not looking for the vertical placement. Okay, so let's do a quick recap before I continue. Point number one, we have two weak points, hips and shoulders. In between that, a lack of bone structure. In between that, a huge density of muscles, and we have to select the biggest muscles possible for the job. How do we select these? Through tensions, namely through stretches. So we actually intend to stretch certain muscles a tiny bit, or probably a bit more, before they are even used. And then I said there is an issue at the catch. Most people are too rigid and try to move everything back at once. That's a recap of the last couple of minutes of this video. Now let's move on to the next step. The solution, in order to have a much faster catch and a much quicker connection, and this really goes hand in hand, is that at the catch your shoulders give a bit. Now I will exaggerate this a tiny bit. It will look like this. That's too much. In terms of visual appearance, it would probably look like that. You probably don't see much. What actually happens is that during the recovery, here, I don't extend my arms completely. I try to keep my wrists and elbows loose. When I rotate, just talking about the shoulders. Here at the catch, I try to get a bit of a stretch down here. To me, it feels like the triceps. Realistically, is the lat. The latissimus dorsi connects here. And the lat is one of the biggest muscles we have for the job. In addition to that, when I start to drive, I try to get a bit of a stretch in my serratus anterior. That's the muscles underneath the shoulder blades. And I also try to get a decent bit of stretch in that tiny little muscle strip here called teres major. Now you don't have to think about all of that. If you just bluntly think about, where do I apply deodorant? Where do I start to smell bad? Here, exactly. Now you move a bit out, and that's the part here you try to get in a bit of a stretch. So that, and I would say 80% of the stretch or 85% of the stretch forward should be achieved on the way to the catch. You don't do this at the catch, so you don't go forward and then, you do that. That's too much. It takes too much time. So you have to anticipate, and on the way to the recovery, on the way to the catch during the recovery, you use your elbows to pull that part already forward quite a bit. So when you start the leg drive, you use the first bit of energy going through your body to fully and finally position your hands. And at the same time, to me, it feels like I'm going in. So I do activate a bit of the pecs and also a bit of the inside part of the arm here. So I bring my hands together. These two elements are quintessentially responsible for holding your shoulders stable. Now, what do we actually want to achieve with that? The trick really is to hold that stretch throughout the entire drive, throughout the entire upper body swing into your arm pull. Your arm pull should not disconnect the shoulders, but that's a different video topic. So let's do a quick recap. How do you keep your shoulders stable at the catch? During the recovery, you keep your wrists and elbows loose. Then you try to get a bit of a pre-stretch in your lats. It feels like the bottom side of your arm goes back into the shoulder blades. With the first stage of the leg drive, you actually try to bring the shoulder blades forward. To me, it feels like protracting the shoulders forward. And I use the energy of the leg drive. Visually speaking, there is not much going on. It doesn't even look like you're protracting the shoulders. Now, some people may say, well, you should bring everything back and have everything at once at the catch. No. In my opinion, not. You know why? Because you need time to connect. It's not like you put your blades into the water vertically and boom, start to apply force. I've heard people say actually, if you're quick and hard enough, you can apply immediate force. Well, you're just going to interrupt boat speed. And the trick at the catch is to let the boat glide without interrupting it. Rebuilding speed is just useless work in my humble opinion. Try to let the boat run. And in order not to affect boat speed negatively, you have to make as little noise as possible, yet still connect. So in order to get the blade into the water softly, what you do is you gradually get it in. And when you have it gradually in, the moment you start to feel more connection, you use that first bit to stretch your shoulders forward. Are you wasting precious stroke length? No, not at all. You are wasting stroke length if you're too rigid, because then you do this and your body tightens up, and there's no way you're going to have that nice leverage effect around mid-drive. In another video, I will show you on the bar rower with force curves what it actually means if you're too rigid at the catch and how you achieve excellent force curves. Force curves, in my opinion and in my experience, are their number one tool any rower or coach should use. Stroke lengths and force curves. This is how you should match rowers in a boat. That is ultimately responsible for a boat going fast or not going fast. And you can be physically inferior to others if you know how to move a boat with the same force curves and same stroke lengths, disregarding the fact what it looks like. So people in the boat may actually look different to one another. Then you're simply going to be faster, a lot faster. And that's potential I think many teams, also national teams, have not even tapped into yet. Now, a last quick recap. Stretch out the low part of your arms at the catch. Protract your shoulders forward. Try to level your hands with your shoulders when you start to drive. And don't try to be too rigid. Let your shoulders go forward. Energy's got to go somewhere anyway. Now, usually when I coach that, especially in the Saturday classes, I think we just spent 2-3 weeks doing that. There are way more details, but I can't explain all of that in the video. It just would be too long. It's much easier if you actually do something at row and I tell you now change this, do that. If you want to join, it's a couple bucks a month. You can cancel month by month, and you find all the details on aramtraining.com. There's also a link in the description of that video. That being said, thank you very much for watching. I hope it answered that specific shoulder question, and I will now move on and answer more of your great questions. And thank you very much for watching and sharing. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.